A very good evening to you and welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Communique, the program that's focusing on what the work that our foreign missions are doing, particularly, of course, speaking with our heads of diplomatic missions. And tonight we're focusing on one of the most important postings of the country that's headed by Emilia Mkusa. That is, of course, the African Union and the Ethiopian post. She is designated to Ethiopia as well as the African Union, but of course also covering Djibouti, Sudan, as well as South Sudan, alongside with UNECA. We try with her and join her in studio for tonight's edition of the program. I'm Diplomatic Communique. Well, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for making time out to join us, Ambassador.
Thank you, and good evening to you too.
Well, when one looks at it, we of course understand that you have two postings, bilateral as well as multilateral. How do you balance the two before we get into the detail?
Well, it's really an act of balancing, as you are saying, but one has to look at the agendas that are before you and also decide on which one is important at that point in time. Of course, the AU itself is the continental organization, and it is very important to cover it, but also the bilateral aspect. We cannot neglect that one. So we do find a balance in covering both.
Let's start with the bilateral relations. I'm sure that we've got a lot more to speak about when it comes to the multilateral relations. Ethiopia is, of course, one of those important countries on the continent. They head the African Union, and they've got a very, very serious role to play in as far as continental unity is concerned. But what are our bilateral relations with Ethiopia?
With Ethiopia, we have signed some bilateral agreements, the one on health, and we are actually revitalizing that already. We are in the process of working towards getting more health professionals into Namibia. So hopefully soon the Ministry of Health will actually talk about that when it's time to come. But that agreement has been in place for a couple of years now. We also have a bilateral agreement on defense. So we also expect cooperation between the two defense ministries, and as well as exchanges, youth exchanges. We had some Namibians who came over, cultural exchanges. In September, we had one of the Namibian designers actually who participated at the cultural event in Ethiopia. So, and also trade matters.
Is there trade between the two countries?
At this point in time, it's very low. There's not much, but we are proposing, we are talking about it, and we are looking at, we are actually working on a MOU between the NCCI as well as the investment board of Ethiopia. So it's on the card for now.
In terms of that, are there particular areas that you're looking at prioritizing when it comes to trade? Are they, because we know with Ethiopia they export, of course, coffee, their leather products are quite popular as well. Are there particular areas you've identified so far?
Coffee is one area that we have identified, and in my previous interview, I think I did indicate that some coffee growers came to Namibia. I think they have found the Kavango region conducive, and they are working together with some Namibians who are interested in growing coffee. So we are following that development. There have been different exchanges now already between them, and we just wait to hear how far they are. Yes.
Well, of course, the fact that Ethiopia is, of course, so important is because of its geopolitical location. And we know that over the last couple of years, while, of course, the rest of the world was only grappling with COVID-19, they also had to deal with civil unrest in a certain part of their country. Can you reflect a little bit on that and, how they've handled and managed to bring to some level of closure that conflict in the Tigray region?
I will not say there's closure yet, but with the assistance from the AU, with the help from the AU, as you are very well aware, the AU appointed former President of Nigeria, Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, to be the high-level mediator between the parties. And last year, they signed an agreement. In actual fact, 2nd of November was the anniversary of that agreement. There is still a lot to be done. But at least there is a lot of progress also done.
What is the status of the situation?
The status of the situation, it's much calmer. It's much calmer. And I think the government is doing its level best to ensure that the agreement is implemented. And the AU is still working with them. On the ground, there are AU staff that are on the ground that are assisting in the Tigray region to ensure that the agreement signed in Pretoria is fully implemented.
I think generally one of the concerns with many times when it comes to country sovereignty and listening to multilateral bodies like the African Union has always been questioned. They said, look, sometimes we might pass policies, we might pass directives, etc., but it's still up to the country whether they can play ball with the AU. What has been the experience with Ethiopia, looking at the fact that they also house the African Union?
We have to thank the Ethiopian government, because the Ethiopian government decided to go with African solutions for African problems. There were many other offers on the table to intervene and to try and find a solution, but they were steadfast behind the African Union to say, we would like to have an African solution to our problem. And they came to the AU, and the AU did deliver. We thank our panel of the wise, because the other lady, former president, deputy president of South Africa, was assisting the former president of Nigeria in this whole mediation efforts. So they are still continuing, because they keep briefing the Peace and Security Council as to where we are now. And we are happy with where they are now, because both parties are talking and both parties are committed to find a lasting solution.
I think one of the, I don't want to call it a criticism, but rather just comments, has also always been, trying to strike that balance between being hasty in sending boots on the ground to go and intervene militarily in a conflict, versus taking the diplomatic route that often is a little bit protracted, but at the end of the day might have the least loss of lives. Talk to us about those considerations when you have to make a decision like that, whenever there's a flare-up on the continent, particularly looking at the situation in Ethiopia as a case study.
It's very important to listen to the people on the ground, the people who are involved in the situation. Because if you also force too much, you will not get the cooperation. But you need to take that diplomatic route and discuss with both parties until everybody is feeling comfortable with the mediation. And also, it makes a big difference who the mediator is. Does he understand, or she? Do they understand what is the situation and what is the cause of the situation, and how are they going to tackle this situation? So basically, both parties were ready to listen. In the beginning, it was not there, but at the end they were ready to listen, because they realized how many lives are being lost, the poverty people are being put in, and also the small children, the women that suffered. It was just too much, and they all came to their senses to say, let's talk.
That's the most important thing. That's the position that we want. Yeah. If you just joined us here watching Diplomatic Communique on NBC One, and of course tonight we are focused on Ethiopia as well as the African Union, Sudan, South Sudan and Djibouti. When we come back after the break, we continue speaking with Ambassador Mkusa. Back to Diplomatic Communique, I'm Ricardo, and of course we focused on the program that zooms in on our foreign missions, and tonight we are looking at Ethiopia as well as the African Union. Emilia Mkusa, the ambassador to the designation, is joining me in studio to unpack our relations with the organization as well as with the countries. Before we get to the multilateralism, I just wanted us to zone in a little bit on South Sudan and Sudan. The two are of course connected by the hip. The comprehensive peace agreement that gave birth to the independence of South Sudan that was signed in 2005, of course, also facilitated with the help of the African Union. What are your reflections, I think, particularly from a multilateralism perspective, on South Sudan as a new country on the continent, but still facing the kind of issues that it's facing at the moment?
Well, I had the privilege of being part of the field visit to South Sudan recently with the Peace and Security Council, AU Peace and Security Council, and we engaged different stakeholders, the government, the civil society, the people themselves, the diplomatic corps that are there. And the briefing that we got is that there is a lot of progress made. And at this point in time, we are expecting elections to take place. Recently, they have adopted the Electoral Act, which was long overdue. The constitution has not been adopted yet, but it's also expected to be adopted soon for elections to take place next year. So as a Peace and Security Council, we are having a follow-up field visit to South Sudan soon. And then we will accompany them actually, because some of the legal issues that were outstanding have also been addressed through the Legal Council of the African Union.
But in terms of, bringing sort of a lasting peace solution to that, many are saying that we have to find a way that the older players do not continuously get involved. If you look at that peace agreement that was signed by John Garang, the same players, Salva Kiir, etc., are the ones that are still, part of the conversation. And so many are saying, look, perhaps it's time for us to look at the younger political players within that and not continue to keep speaking to the same older guard. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Actually, you will be surprised that they do have younger politicians now in the mix. Whether it is in Parliament, we engage the Speaker and few parliamentarians that were there. We engage the youth. They are now talking. They are now speaking what they want. And we just hope that it will continue like that, so that we can really see the lasting peace.
There were, of course, also concerns, particularly with regards to South Sudan, and many are saying that they can't find a lasting solution because there's an invisible hand that's also involved from Khartoum in some of these affairs as well. Is there merit in terms of that kind of perception or thinking?
Well, it has merit, but I think when the will is there to talk and solve the problem, it might get better. It's a difficult one because of the situation in Abyei, where the whole issue is actually lying. So we just hope that the situation will be solved, but it is being addressed. It is being addressed. It is currently before the Peace and Security Council, both South Sudan and the situation in Abyei and Sudan itself.
So in terms of what Abyei is asking for, I don't know, we know the African Union position really has been, we have to follow the letter of the law, and you are also anti-secessionist. And for many of times in this region, whether it's in Djibouti, Darfur, Abyei, as you're mentioning right now, secessionism always rears its head. Is that still a concern for the African Union, or is it now a matter of just finding a lasting peace solution?
It is a concern because the solution that we are looking at is a solution that will last, supposed to last. And that is one of the issues that are critically being analyzed and being addressed. So not an easy one, I have to say, but it's worth trying. It's worth trying? Yes.
Well, Djibouti is also one of the areas that you cover. I really want to get to the economic part of the diplomatic conversation, but the geopolitics, of course, in the region continue to be a concern. In terms of that, one of the issues that you're looking at is preventing, of course, the access to armaments and guns. That has been a focus area of the African Union. And for that, you require, of course, multinational companies and other organizations, of course, the International Maritime Organization and some of the others to be involved as well. Are you getting the support from those international organizations to prevent the armament of those regions and to prevent access to arms for them?
On Djibouti, I cannot really comment a lot, although I'm covering Djibouti. I was supposed to present credentials last week, and I have not presented credentials yet. So I cannot say much about Djibouti, although it is my neighbor.
All right.
Yes.
Well, Ambassador, stay with us. When we come back after the break, we'll focus on the African Union, the mission there, and of course the work that is being done in the area of multilateralism. Stay with us. You're watching Diplomatic Communique on NBC One. When we come back, we focus on the African Union. Watching Diplomatic Communique on NBC1 tonight. We're speaking to Ambassador Emilia Mkusa. It's designated, of course, to Ethiopia as well as the African Union, covering South Sudan, as well as Djibouti, and the United Nations Economic Commission on Africa, UNECA. Ambassador, we were, of course, reflecting a little bit on the bilateral relations before we went to the break, but I think it's important for us now to zoom in a bit on the African Union. I want us to reflect and just take a bit of a historical look first in terms of when we joined the African Union as a country, and what the thinking and the aspiration behind becoming part of this union, which was, of course, first the Organization of African Union.
Yeah, as you said, it was first the Organization of African Union. And we should also know that Ethiopia, together with others, supported Namibia during the struggle. And they are part of those who took Namibia's case to the League of United Nations, and they supported us. And the African Union has always been there, discussing and promoting decolonization. Yeah. And of course, Namibia became an independent country, but we still have Western Sahara, who is still not an independent country. So Namibia, coming from that background, continue to advance that position for Western Sahara also to become independent and to see the whole continent at least being independent. But with the African Union, it has grown now. Morocco has been readmitted to the African Union, and we are also now looking at focusing on Agenda 2063. Literally, the agenda have changed to economic and development.
But how do we talk about economic and development when we're still seeing that the historical areas that have had civil unrest continue to do so? Eastern DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Now we've got the 4 coups that took place earlier in the year in West Africa. The South Sudan situation that we're talking about, Western Sahara and the Morocco problem that we're sitting with. Many are questioning and saying that perhaps, this toothless bulldog narrative of the African Union is maybe true.
All those activities that are needed to assist those countries need funding. And I think at this point in time, you have various peace operations that are in Somalia. You have the UN that is in DRC. You have various actors in the Sahel, in Central Africa. It was only the southern region that was not affected by terrorism until the situation in Mozambique. So literally all the 5 regions of the continent now are affected either by coups, violent extremism, or terrorism.
What are some of the contributing factors? What do you think are the contributing factors for this?
A study done by the African Peer Review Mechanism revealed that it is the way we manage our governments. I think it is important that we go back to the drawing board.
So it's a leadership problem.
It's a leadership problem. It's poverty. There are so many root causes that have been identified, but we have to relook at them. Although some do not want to agree to the outcome of that study, but it is what it is. And if you look at in the Western region now, you have 4 countries that are suspended from the AU. You have 1 country in Central region, Gabon, and then you have Sudan in Eastern region. So literally, it's very, very difficult. And you also have unrest in the Northern region. You have Tunisia. The situation of Tunisia with the African migrants and so on. So the AU is literally seized with all these matters currently. They are all before the Peace and Security Council. But it is cooperation. You need some cooperation. But where the problem comes in is where the African Union wants to put in place peace support operations. However, because we are really squeezed by
with resources. So we're saying that we want African solutions for African problems, but we can't afford the solutions.
Yes, but what we are also saying is that the United Nations is the guarantor of peace in the world. So now we are speaking to the United Nations to ensure predictable financing for Africa peace support, or for Africa peace support operations led by the African Union. So the discussion, we have a consensus paper that was adopted by the heads of states of Africa. It has been presented to the UN Security Council. It still needs to go to the UN General Assembly, and hopefully, if agreed to, we will tap into the UN assessed contribution for Africa peace support operation led by African Union.
But here's my concern, really. We're looking at the AU, the African Union Committee of 10, that has been established to really lobby for reforms at the United Nations. So on one end, we're saying, look, we're putting pressure on you to start with reforms, and those reforms, of course, that require for us to have some sort of equal opportunity, equal say on the Security Council, the balance of power on the Security Council. But at the same time, on this one hand, we are looking for financial support from them as a continental grouping. Isn't that in conflict with one another? On one end, we want to be strong-armed, but on the other side, we are asking for assistance. How do we balance the two? And will this sort of a contribution, is that not going to weaken our position with what we are requiring from the African Union Committee of 10? Not at all,
not at all. The Committee on 10 is supposed to advance the consensus position that was agreed to in Ezweluni in 2005. That is calling for Africa to get 2 seats, permanent seats in the Peace and Security Council, and 2 additional seats.
But why will we give people that are begging from us to support them seats of equal power on the high table? If I'm in charge, I'm not going to do that.
If you are saying you are in charge of the world peace, then you should be able to fund it. So we are asking the United Nations that peace on the African continent is also peace on the European continent. It's also peace on the Asian continent. So we need those resources. It's not just that they alone will contribute, but the Africans themselves will also contribute towards that.
If one looks at this, of course, at the opening of the 9th session of the Heads of State, of the Heads of Mission conference recently held in Windhoek, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of International Relations lamented the fact that a lot of countries are now moving more towards unilateralism and shared serious concern around the state of multilateralism in the world. Looking at those concerns that are being shared, how worried should we be that multilateralism, in fact, is working? Should we still depend on it? Looking at what's happening at the UN with Israel and the US, of course, consistently vetoing the blockade in Cuba, for example, now positioning themselves again with the war in Palestine. The situation of course, the ECOWAS also dealing with the problem with those 4 countries, saying they don't want to listen to the regional grouping. How concerned should we be about the state of multilateralism globally?
We should be concerned, because...
Can we still rely on it as a solution?
We should be concerned, but we should rely on multilateralism. We can never go alone. We need to rely on each other. The issue of Palestine has been a standing agenda on the Assembly's decision.
But continuously getting vetoed.
No. At the African Union.
Okay.
At the African Union, every year we adopt a resolution in support of Palestine. Yes, some people might say it's nothing. That's how Namibia was struggling. Namibia was going around. Namibia was looking for support, and that support is the support today that we need to give Western Sahara. That's the support today we need to give Palestine. So basically, multilateralism should continue. We should continue pressing on that. We cannot go alone.
In terms of that balance, and I think with multilateralism, we speak about it a lot at continental level and at global level as well, but it really starts at regional level. We know, of course, like you said, SADC has been doing quite well in terms of maintaining stable democracies across the region, except for the flare-up recently with Mozambique. But now we're looking at a situation where ECOWAS are caught up in a bit of a tight spot in terms of dealing with those with those 4 countries that have also met alone outside of the architecture or the framework of ECOWAS. Speak to us a little bit around the balance between, the regional bodies and their effectiveness versus, finding the right time to take issues to the continental body and for them to have the authority to deal with those problems.
Let me start with SADC. There is a situation in the DRC, and we all know that the DRC have requested for SADC to intervene. SADC went to the AU and requested for the AU to hold a tripartite meeting of all the actors within SADC, within the DRC. That meeting took place in Luanda. And that meeting currently is still, there was the Chief of Defense meeting that took place in Addis Ababa. I think it was in October actually, because I was coming here and they were having the meeting. So, and it is the same with ECOWAS. ECOWAS is having those 4 countries, but the AU is supporting ECOWAS in its efforts. The UN is supporting ECOWAS in its efforts. So going alone will never work, but going together, we will work. It will work.
In conclusion, Ambassador Mkusa, from your side, with everything that's going on in the world, how should we view as Namibians our commitments that we're making towards a lot of these multilateral organizations, the African Union, and those that we involved? I think we didn't even touch on UNECA. And as you're touching on the conclusion, I just also wanted to ask, because I know you've pointed out on a number of occasions the concern around our representation in some of these organizations at an administrative level, especially when appointments and so on are available. Just a brief reflection on that before as we close off the program for today.
Well, the appointment of Namibian citizens at the African Union, it's a personal decision of any individual, but we would like to see those individuals appointed within the AU to benefit from the contribution that we give to the AU. And as they benefit, Namibia too benefit. As we are sitting here, there is a meeting taking place in Swakopmund on sanitation. It's at ministerial level. Namibia is benefiting by hosting and, getting information as to what others are doing. And we can look at our own policies and see where do we go wrong? What can we learn from the others? And so on. So too with UNECA. UNECA deals with economic issues on Africa. On the African continent. We normally, UNECA give a lot of capacity building to member states. Namibia do participate. Maybe those who are coming back are not saying we benefited from. Yes, we
but we are represented.
But we are represented. We are represented, and I'm actually happy to say we have a couple of new Namibian staff members that joined the African Union. So so our quota system is being filled slowly but surely.
Ambassador, thank you so much for making time out to join us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there we go. That's our diplomatic powerhouse, a veteran and career diplomat, Emilia Mkusa, Ambassador to Ethiopia, African Union, Djibouti, South Sudan, as well as Sudan, and the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa are joining us to reflect on our bilateral and multilateral relations in the region. Of course, we had to focus on the geopolitics of the continent, but in the next edition, we will, of course, look at economic diplomacy. On that note, I'm Ricardo Twagose. Until next time, join us once again for Diplomatic Communique. Bye-bye.